Alright, so let's hop into Lab 1, designing an operating system installation strategy. One thing I highly recommend is before you start any lab and you have all your virtual machines up and running, go into your system, and since you're going to be using the command prompt a lot, right click on it, go pin to taskbar, and you'll always have it handy. First thing we're going to do is we're going to check for basic network connectivity and make sure we can access the servers and resources that we're going to need to complete this lab. So we're going to ping RWDC01 by name, and we're getting a reply back. So we know DNS is actually up and running, and so is the server. If you don't get a response, go back, check your network settings, make sure that everything's running first before you even attempt the labs. Exercise 1.1, we're going to be creating a VHD boot file using disk management, which is the GUI interface. Exercise 1.2 is creating a VHD boot file using diskpart and DISM. Exercise 1.3, we're going to add that VHD image to the boot menu. Exercise 1.4, we're going to finish off with migrating user state and data. The lab challenge using Windows to Go we can't actually do, so it's kind of pointless. First thing we're going to wind up doing is we're going to wind up creating the VHD file using the GUI. Click on Start, go into Computer Management, click on Disk Management, right click on it, we're going to create a VHD. We're going to set the location to be the root of C, and we're going to wind up calling our VHD Win8 VHDA. We're going to set the size to be 20 gigabytes, and we're going to make it dynamically expanding. Now we see we have a non-initialized disk. We're going to right click on it, go initialize disk, accept the defaults, and now we have a disk we can do something with. Right click on the unallocated space, go new simple volume, next, next. We're accepting all the defaults. We want this to be drive E. Next, and perform quick format is checked off for us. Go next, and then finish. And the disk is formatting. Now that the disk is done, we see new volume E has appeared. And if we go into Windows Explorer, we'll see we have a new volume here. Now, just one little quick note. One thing I've noticed in the labs, I'll just minimize this and get it out of the way, you'll see you'll need to format the disk E and drive E before you can use it. Do you want to format it? A lot of you wound up doing the lab work, seeing this pop up, then clicking on Format Disk. What winds up happening here is after you've put your image onto the disk, if you click Format, you've just deleted everything you've just done, which is why a lot of the labs weren't working for you. We'll just cancel that out. Now that we've done that, we're going to create another VHD boot file image using diskpart and DISM. Do that once again. We'll go Start, right click, run a command prompt as administrator, and we'll type in diskpart. That brings us into the diskpart command. Now we're going to create a virtual disk in the root of C, and we're going to call it WinVHDB. We're going to set the size of it to be 20 gigabytes. We're also going to make it an expandable disk. We do that with the following command: create vdisk, That's the complete command that we have to put in. Create a virtual disk file in the root of C, call it Win8VHDB, maximum size 20 gigabytes, and type expandable. We now have a VHD. Now we're going to select this VHD. And we successfully selected that disk. We're now going to attach it to our operating system. And we now seeing it appear in the computer management console. Next thing we have to do is we're going to have to create a primary partition to make it bootable. We're going to assign a drive letter of F, and we're going to format the disk. Note the disk is now online. And we now have drive F. Note in the management console, it is saying that the disk is now formatting. Now that it's done, Windows is seeing it and mounted. Also, you'll note it's asking you to format the disk again. Cancel out of that. Now we're going to use DISM to apply the image file directly to the disk. We'll exit the diskpart command and we'll go into DISM. So the command is DISM, apply the image. Then we're specifying the image file where it is. We're going to mount it at index 1 and apply to drive F. And through the magic of editing, we are now 100% done. Just going to check one thing here. Get rid of that. Now if we go on to C, we'll note we've applied it, our image file to VHDB, and note the size. The disk has increased in size dramatically over the one that has absolutely nothing in it. Okay, on to exercise 1.3, adding the VHD image to the boot menu. We're going to do this with BCD Edit. That's the boot configuration data editor. Step 1, we're going to enumerate the disk. Now in the command prompt, one thing I recommend here is to right click on the top here, go properties, and make sure that you're into quick edit mode. By default this isn't selected, unfortunately. What this allows you to do is to just grab something that you want, hit enter, and it copies it. This is the GUID, the current boot volume. Okay, now DISM has successfully completed its operation, and we're just doing a BCD edit again to check the enumeration. And this is what we have. Our next step is to use BCD edit to copy our default to our Windows 8 VHD boot to add it to this enumeration. Now the one thing to make sure that you do is make sure you get the right type of bracket here. This one's the curly one. Also, being DOS, anytime you have spaces, you have to put the quotation marks around it in order for the command to be accepted. Now we have a new entry. Just going to double check quick edit mode is enabled. Enable it. And I'm going to copy this value right here, which is the new GUID. Right click to paste. Now we'll check to see if this actually took. And here we go. We have a secondary bootloader, and it's our VHD. So let's test this out and reboot our system. And there we go. We can boot into Windows 8, or we can boot into the Windows 8 VHD boot that we just created. Now, before we move on to the rest of the lab, a couple things I want to address with the multi-boot environment. Why would you want to do this? If you want to test out new Windows 10 beta, or you have a special configuration, or you'd like to run Linux or anything else, you can actually do that from here when you do a VHD boot. You can also put in Windows Server 2012, play around with Hyper-V, do your labs, all the rest of that good stuff. You can't do that with the way we have it set up here. Simply because everything's already running on Hyper-V, and you can't run a hypervisor on top of another hypervisor in the Windows world. The other thing that I'd like to point out is if you're using this in a business environment in Active Directory, if you're going to be booting off the VHD, make sure that the VHD machine name that you have is not the same as the host machine. Because if you do that, what's going to wind up happening is the system will wind up booting with the same name, and if you go back to the original machine or the actual host machine, you're going to wind up with a trust relationship issue, which you've probably seen once or twice in these particular labs, and you don't want to go there. Finally, the one thing I want to talk about is one major oversight that they have is they tell you how to create a multi-boot environment, but they don't tell you how to get rid of them. Thankfully, it's a pretty simple process here once you get into it. There's one tool they really don't talk about in any of the much in the book, and it's something that's been around since Windows XP, and it's called msconfig. So if you run msconfig, this is your system configuration here when you run msconfig, and you can do normal setup, you can do a diagnostic startup, or you can do a selective startup if you're having issues. You can also do things like take a look at what services are actually running on your system, and you can turn off various things that you don't want. If you don't want BitLocker, or if there's other applications that you have like Adobe Updater and stuff like that that you really don't want, you can uncheck those from the startup. We don't have any here, so I can't show you anything there, but you just go into it and you'd uncheck whatever services that you don't want to have running in the background on boot. Saves you some memory, and will also wind up speeding up your boot time. Now in boot, you'll note we have two different boots here. One is the VHD boot and the current OS. And if we want to get rid of the multi-boot environment here, all we do is you click here, you go delete, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Now, I'll just show you. We'll do a restart, and once the system is up and running again, lo and behold, it's just a normal login. You don't wind up getting a boot screen anymore. And that's it. Alright, so let's move on to the last part of the lab. That's migrating the user's state and the user's data. First thing we've got to do is we've got to make a place to put our backup. We have to create a test account so we can test the backup procedure, and then we have to do a restore. First thing you have to do is log in here onto server 02 and create a new folder typed migration. And we also have to create another one called data. Now in the migration folder, we wind up having to share that out. Do that by right-clicking, properties, sharing, telling us to go into the advanced sharing. We'll share this folder as migration. Go into permissions, everyone. Allow full control. Click OK. Okay, close, and that's done. And now we have to do the same thing for the data folder. Now that's done, we have a location that's read and writable to absolutely everybody for their migration and their data. Now let's go on to our WDC01 and create a new user. Tools, directory users and computers. Eventually. And we'll create a new user here. Right click on users, new user, and we're to call this user user1. Full name user1, user logon name will be user1. Click next. We're going to uncheck this, and we're supposed to use the password for the password. So uppercase PA $W0RD. Again to confirm. Next. So now we have user1 and the user logon name is user1 at contoso.com. Finish. And here's our user1 in Active Directory users and computers. Now let's see if this is actually working. And done. Okay, so we're going to right click on our desktop, create a new document. Lab 1. Let's throw in a little extra here. Wow, that is a loud background. Okay, next thing it's asking us to do is log off. Okay, now it's asking us to log in as the administrator. Oh, actually, let's do it this way here. Since we got to use the command prompt often. We'll pin it to the taskbar. Okay, so next thing we have to do is in DOS map to the server 02 migration share that we created earlier, and we're going to in DOS we have to use netuse. just so you can see what's going on here. In Windows Explorer, we actually have that folder here in Windows Explorer, so we know we can connect to this. The NetUse is the DOS version of mapping a network drive. Just so we can see this in action here, I'm going to move this over here. And under computer. Once we do the mapping, we should see this change a bit. And there we go. There's the M drive. Next thing it's asking us to do is to go to RWDC01, software, window kits, 8.0 ADK, and go to the ADK setup. Next. No. Of course we're going to accept. Now we have to deselect everything except for the user state migration tool. Now, the reason that we wind up getting this error is when the virtual machine was actually set up, it crashed partway through and the setup had to run again. Bad programming. They wound up creating a subfolder with this particular cab file. So we have to navigate to it manually. So we're looking for 4D. Okay. Now it should have put it here, but it didn't. And this is the file that we're going to wind up needing. That's this 4D2878. Go retry. Now it wants us to copy the user state migration tools to the M drive. Okay, copy that. Go to M. Okay, so we have the user state migration tool now sitting on our M drive that we can access here. Now, what I just did here is using the M colon, that changes to the M drive, and you see the M prompt pop up here, and I'm going to go call directory, and I typed in U, hit tab to autocomplete, and it filled in the blanks because it knows that file, that folder's already there. AMD64, there we go. And now we're in that folder. Now it's going to ask us to run the scan states command. Alright, so command here, scan state, and user interface, Contoso slash user1 is what we're going to copy, and we're going to copy that over to server O2 data, and we're going to use the configuration that's stored within the migration app.xml in the migration user.xml. And the O, VSC, and EFS copy and C, those are just extra switches that we have to have for this particular command. You can look them up online. Okay, so now that the command's completed, went through the entire process here. First thing it wound up doing is examine the system, discover what can be migrated. It found the Contoso user 1, the local admin 1, the local admin account on the Win8A, Contoso administrator, and this computer's settings. Migration units that it gathered was the user account, user 1, admin 1, admin, Contoso administrator, and the computer. And no error codes. Alright, so the next thing we have to do is we actually have to delete user 1 from the system here. Advanced system settings, user profiles, and here's Contoso user 1, and we'll delete that. Yeah, he's a jerk, we're getting rid of him. Okay, so the user no longer exists on this system. Now that we've backed everything up, let's restore stuff. And we'll do we'll use the load state command for this. Okay, so load state, Contoso user 1, insert row2 data folder, and we're calling up these XML configuration files. Okay, here's our good friend error 4317. We'll run it again, and we'll put in the C option, which is telling us to do right here. Now, if this worked right, I should be able to log off from administrator, log in as user 1, and I should have my document and my desktop. Looking promising. Hey, there we go. And that's the lab.